Okay, Martin Taylor.
Whose message is this into the future?
Is that your question?
Is that your question?
Well, this is one question. When I was intending to come here, I thought that Holman would very likely spend much of the time talking with Rick and Bill and anybody else who was interested about information and perception. Decided that this was probably not a great idea, and when it was at Bill's house on Tuesday, I guess, thought, well, Bruce Nevin isn't coming, so why don't I try to talk about something about which I agree with him, that there's been a fair amount of discussion on the net. Not trying to talk for Bruce, but I hope he won't be too distressed with what I have to say, which is about language as artifact. And well, I have some ideas as to why PCT says it should become an artifact, which is a property of the society rather than the property of the individual, even though it resides only in individuals. And then it occurred to me that for some time I've been wanting to talk to people on the net, mainly, about a book that I read about a year ago. And so here's the plan. No, not the plan. We need two things. We need light from that, and we need a screen for this.
The left-hand switch.
That one?
All the way down.
All the way down.
Let go.
Head duck.
Let go.
Let go.
Okay, you don't have to do no control. It helps.
It's a helping.
Yeah. Now the next thing is to make this do something.
The big switch.
Yeah, it says on.
Is it not plugged in?
Yeah.
Oh, no,
It's not plugged in. That's a good
I
sign.
think Tom's probably broke that.
Yeah, Tom's
It's plugged in
broken.
there. It's plugged in there.
No, that's the expensive one I broke.
Well, let's try the spare.
Here's are good for.
Now here's the plan. The plan
no.
is
Hitting.
you have two half-baked talks. Right, they sort of tie in a little bit, but they're really quite separate. The SR project is one that might interest you. So,
Could you put that back up just for a moment?
We must zoom in on it.
Thank you.
All right.
okay. Almost exactly a year ago, I heard an interview that was most remarkable. Radio interview with an autistic woman who had written a book, which was her autobiography. Nobody Nowhere. And I thought to myself, I really have to get this book because it was such a fascinating interview. She had such difficulty with the interaction with the interviewer that they had arranged a special process whereby he had gone to see her in her own environment, and she had been always been quite dark, which is quite important to the story. In the dark, more or less, they had talked, and she had gradually got to trust him, and at the end of a long session with her, which had made her very tired, she had agreed with him that he would type out a set of questions for her, to which she would type answers. She brought the typescript to the interview and then did not refer to them. It was there as a support. In case she blanked out and was unable to understand, she could always refer back to her own writing. Anyway, as I did get the book, I read this thing and I thought, everything in this is beautiful illustrations of things we've been hearing about on the net. Things about imagination, things about control, reorganization, failures of or successes of. And I don't want to spend very much time with it, but I want to just say one or two points about what she says about herself. She started off the book talking about one of her very first memories, where she was making color patches which filled the space so that she would avoid seeing the world. And she, throughout the book, goes back to saying explicitly in one or two cases that she had great trouble controlling her perceptions. She says that. I'm not sure she used exactly those words, but very close. And so it was so much easier to withdraw into imagination and control that she could do. And so whenever things got a little bit stressful for her in the world, she would leave the world and come into her own imaginations. What she could do was rhythmic movements, rhythmic tappings, head noddings, would go on for hours. It would terribly annoy her parents. Her mother was apparently an extremely abusive mother. And who knows what that had to do with the autism. But what she experienced in the world were failures, I would say, of grouping things, failures in the world to relate it to the imaginations that she had. She would see extremely brilliant colours which pained her. The grass was, she of course doesn't know what anybody else's perceptions are, but nobody, she felt, complains about the grass being such bright green that it hurts. You know, this is the sort of thing that she was worried about. That she never saw what people think of as a lawn. She saw lots of blades of grass. She didn't see a cloudy sky. She saw many clouds of particular shapes. She didn't integrate, didn't group, didn't coalesce things. She learned language, no problem. I'm not sure whether it was early or late, but she learned quite well language, but not to interact. And the worst thing in her whole life is interacting with people. That if somebody tries to interact with her, it's an immediate withdrawal unless they're very careful, very gentle, and try not to get too close. In your crowd program, a very good distance thing. Anyway, there are so many things. She never, and still hasn't, I think she's in her 20s now. She's succeeded in passing through high school. She's gone through undergraduate. She has, I believe, a master's degree in social work, where she works with autistic people. And she knows how to interact. She knows what they're like. She knows their world. And apparently she's quite successful with it, according to the interview. This is not in the book, but in the interview. Yeah. So anyway, all I want to say really is, it's nearly a year since I read the book. I forget a lot of details. But if anybody interested in PCT can get hold of it. Yeah, Greg?
Well, just to finish, I just wanted to just comment that there's another book very similar to this.
Really?
It's called There's a Boy in Here.
Yeah.
And it was written by the boy's mother and the boy in alternate sections so that the mother would, in a fairly normal narrative history, describe what she saw him doing. And then as far back as he could remember, he said, well, here's why I was doing this, as I recall.
That would be fascinating too.
And I remember one line, he said, well, I just didn't want to deal with people because I couldn't control them. They weren't constant. They were always changing.
Exactly what Donna would say. Exactly what Donna would say. But going back to various things which have just come up here in particularly the social interaction talks, the problem of controlling people is much worse than the problem of controlling the natural world. And it's no wonder she has trouble controlling the perception of a stone. And one of the things she loved to do was to collect things like little stones and lay them out in lines, very regular patterns. She loved to do things in very regular ways, regular rhythms, regular oscillations, regular placements of things.
He spoke of looking at every piece of the carpet, every little tuft, to make sure, he said, that it was all the same.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's the same sorts of things that she's saying.
Who's the author of this one?
Donna
The second one I don't know.
Williams.
The second one.
That one, but Greg.
Yes, I read the book not too long ago, and I was tremendously moved by it. And I sat down immediately to write her a letter, and then I realized, well, that would be violating everything she said in her book.
I had much the same feeling.
So I never wrote it.
Yeah, neither did I. But on the other hand, she reacts very well to written material.
I thought every now and then of what could I say that wouldn't be butting in, you know?
Yeah.
Hey, let's put her on the network.
Well, I seriously thought of suggesting that to her, because she likes writing, she likes reading. She would be voracious in the library. She'd go through everything in one topic section, and she was, one of her great discoveries was that there existed a syndrome called autism, because she knew there was something wrong with it. She kept going around to psychiatrists and saying, am I mad? Am I in trouble? What is it? What's happening to me? I'm not people. She was 3 people. I mean, invented two more personae, which she used to shield herself from the world. She had a very analytic character called Willie, who she used to deal with people in a formal sort of way. And she had a flighty girl called Carol, who she used to interact in a sort of friendly sort of way. But Donna was always hidden, always behind. She never allowed people to see Donna. And she didn't control Carol or Willie. They controlled her. And she didn't particularly like them, but she used them. And eventually, when she discovered about autism, she was, in the book, as far as I remember it, she says she thinks she's got rid of them. Anyway.
From her point of view, what was the insight, discovery? I haven't read the books.
Pardon?
When you said when she discovered autism, what?
Oh, in the
What was
library.
the
In
insight?
the library.
And just
And
reading
she
about
said,
it.
that's me.
So learning the label.
And then having done that, she went to a psychiatrist at her university, went in the door and said, look, I've read this stuff here, and this is what I've written about me, which is the draft of this book. She'd written the book straight through in 4 weeks, and no corrections, no anything, just straight through writing. Handed it to him, said, look at this is me, am I autistic? And he said, well, your behavior right now says to me that you probably are. and then he worked with her, and her intention was, having had him read this, she would burn it. She didn't want other people to know this, but she needed for herself to know. And she had to have somebody, and he persuaded her to let it be shown to a publisher and so forth.
The one thing that got to me was that I kept feeling, she isn't so different from me.
Exactly, I felt the same. It's so easy to have gone the other way, I thought. There's so many things that in a stressful situation, there is a tendency to withdraw and pretend it isn't there. Denial, if you like. Work in imagination. Imagine the world is as you would have it be, not make it be the way you would have it be. Perceptual control is make it be the way you'd have it be. If you can't do that or feel that it's a problem doing that in the real world, it's much easier to do it in imagination.
I was
Perhaps
thinking
she
maybe this
doesn't.
is why I like the network so much.
Perhaps she doesn't need our help so much as we could use her help.
Yes.
Well,
Get
that's
some insights
Yeah.
and increased understanding of how the world looks when people have problems of these kinds.
Yes, it was definitely full of that stuff.
she's
And
amazing.
perhaps she might find it easier to be helpful to us rather than being helped by us.
She likes to help.
Yeah. She wasn't particularly out to change anything or to get.
No, that's not her business. She's not a perceptual controller in the real world.
Yeah.
And she's forced herself to interact with the world, and it gets very tiring, very stressful. Michelle used the word effort, right? And it's effort for her to do things in the world. And at the end of the radio interview, they had a half-hour interview, and he asked her, would she permit some free interview and questions had not been asked. And she felt that she trusted him well enough to permit that. But after 15 minutes, her person with her asked her, was she getting very tired? And she said, yes, she was. So they stopped it at that point. And it was very, very difficult because she likes, she says sometimes her understanding of visual things, including words, goes away. Sometimes her understanding of things she hears goes away. And that's why she had the typescript. Because if she didn't understand what he was saying to her, she might not be able to say, but she could look at the typescript of what he said, and not often did they both go away together. There's a big problem there of attention. There's another thing about autists, and this is not a fact in the sense you like a fact, but very often autistic people have a syndrome called hyperlexia. You know about dyslexia, where people have problems making word sense. Some autistic people are better than normal at extracting words out of fragmented letters and things like that. It's just an interesting fact, which said to me at the time, they devoted their resources to pattern, when I say at the time, it's when we were doing our book on reading, that she these autistics who exhibit hyperlexia were devoting their developmental resources, so to speak, more into the pattern recognition and seeing forms and shapes in the world than they were into the analysis and recognition and understanding.
I wonder if that doesn't also suggest why so many autists get to be savants in some direction. Where there too, it seems as if an extraordinary number of their nerves seem to be devoted to controlling lower order phenomena in one given area, and they're hyper developed there, and it's as if it were at the expense then of developing farther up, higher up into the hierarchy.
Makes a lot of sense.
Didn't she play the piano?
Yes, she did. She took a lot of solace out of music, and she composed pieces which she said were regarded by others as being very good. But again, she didn't let them out to the public.
Yeah.
Only to her boyfriend and things like people like that.
She had a boyfriend.
Many.
That's right, she had a boyfriend.
Carol had boyfriends.
Oh, no, there was one though, the one she met on a train coming back from Germany.
Yeah, he was an autist as well, or something
Yeah,
like
he
it.
was autistic too, and
Yeah.
this was the strangest love story,
Yeah.
because they hardly ever got within 10 feet of each other.
Yeah.
It was too hard to be that close to
That's right.
anybody.
But they understood each other in that
They
respect.
understood completely.
I thought of some of this before. I don't know if that really happened or if I was just thinking about it, but we were in a car and the wind and the rain is extremely difficult to drive in. Instead of trying harder and harder to drive, you just shut down, and pull over to the side and say, forget it, I'm not going to drive.
Yeah.
And when that happened, I thought, well, this is something like autism. I thought of it as gain. Your gain isn't high enough to control the variables that you want to, so you just quit.
Yeah, I've asked on the net about this business of withdrawal when you have an uncontrollable situation, which we often do. When I was developing the layered protocol theory of communication, always one of the aspects of the grammar was abort, which you do either when some higher level has succeeded and you don't need it anymore, as the reference level has changed, or you just don't think you can make it. This guy's never going to understand that, what you're trying to say. Quit. Cut out. And you see that a lot, and the example you gave is a very typical one, that you're trying very hard to do something that you really want to do. If you don't really, really, really want to do it, and you don't succeed, you go some other way. Well, now that is part of the mechanism of the multi-distribution of output. You achieve your end by some other means. Give up on that, you'll get around it. If the higher level one is still unsatisfied, maybe that's what the autist does, just cuts out from all of them. I don't know.
That's a brilliant thing to bring up. It really is a source book on PCT.
Well, as I was reading it, I thought, here it is. Anyway, that's talk one, half-baked idea one. Okay. Unless people want to talk a bit more about Donna or autism or whatever. Well, Greg, you've got some more to say
Next year
about Boy
when
and
we read
his
all
mother?
read the book.
Yeah, it's very hard, and it was in every bookstore for about 3 weeks, and then I couldn't find a copy. I tried to buy a whole bunch of copies to give to people. I bought 2 extra at one right off, and then I went to buy a whole lot more. I thought some of you guys might be interested, and I would sort of send them around, but couldn't find them. I've forgotten which press it was. You might know. You probably got it at home, I suppose.
Ask Mary, my library resource. Was it a library book, honey?
What?
Was the Nobody Nowhere a library book?
Okay. All right. Talk 2, about why language can be thought of as an artifact. The first couple of slides are slides that I made up for a tutorial talk on perceptual control theory. Some, I guess, most of them were for a talk last September. But I'm only putting up the first one here just to show you the symbology I use, because everybody draws their elementary control systems a little different. So always in my pictures, I have the box, perceptual input function is that shape, comparator is like that, and the output function is the amplifier triangle. So when you see little ones like that, they're connected in that way. and the perceptual output comes out the top left, reference input comes in the top right. And so we put together hierarchies that look like that with little boxes. Some of them are degenerate in that they don't have sensory inputs. Some of them are degenerate in that they don't have outputs, but generally speaking they're all control systems. No problem. Now, we've talked a lot on the net about the mirror world, and a lot of you have seen the diagram, but I like to look at the world, the created world, like that. You've got the same structure here, which is inside the person. The perceptual input functions for the different control systems create structures in the world. The structures aren't in the world, of course, but if you can control something about the world that makes your perceptual function alter, then there might as well be such a structure in the world. And so the linkages in the world that you perceive are precisely the linkages of your control systems. So when you're talking about a complex environmental variable, that's out in the world, and nobody else in the world may have such a variable, but you do. Okay. So now we think part of the world has other people in it, and inside the other people you can create complex environmental variables. You see in them things that when you say something produces effects that you interpret with your perceptual input function there as having the right consequence to them, to you, of what they do from what you did, and it's the standard feedback loop.
How do you have communication at anything but the very bottom level?
You don't.
Well, what
You
are
don't.
Those are virtual connections.
Oh, those are virtual.
Right. Go back here. How do you have communication between your perception of entering words and whatever happens on your word processor that says there's something? All you got is photons on the screen.
Yeah.
You don't got any words on the screen. There aren't any. You put them there.
Okay.
We're a little sensitive to that other diagram because somebody actually up in Canada actually proposed that these direct connections existed in addition to the environmental ones.
I mean, somebody other than me?
Yeah, other than you.
Yeah.
But he meant it literally.
Ah, I see. Because the next one was precisely that. That there's the communication of people. I use the word Ursula and Claude because they have the initial letters U and C, user and computer, and they're of opposite sex, so when you're writing about it, it's easy to say his output and her output and so forth, so you know which is which. Somebody say something?
Claude could be a woman too. Serious. Anyway, sorry.
Okay, so it all goes on through the effects on the physical world, and since your partner doesn't have the same complex environmental variables you do, you don't know that what you're doing in the partner is having any particular effect. All you know is that you're getting the right physical effects from the partner to make it seem as if at some level that the word has got across, or that the point you're making has been understood. But you don't know any of that for sure. All you have is your perceptual signal, which matches the reference signals coming down are the means by which these different things, and what in the original layered protocols things I called that the primal message was what you were trying to get across, but it actually is it's what you want to perceive the partner as understanding at that level of abstraction, and if they already do, the primal message is the same, but you don't have to do anything to create the state because there's no error. The error is in fact what generates the virtual message.
Question. Could this analysis be taken as some form of evidence that different people have similar hierarchies?
Well, I'm going to come a little bit to that in the later part of the talk. I think it's not as evidence as such,
It's a suggestion.
but one may expect they would evolve to do so if they're going to use language in a way that allows them to communicate so that they both are satisfied.
Yeah.
I like this way of representing it, but it seems like it's safest with a already trained control
control theory?
Oh, yeah. Surely.
Have to be cleared first.
If you're really going to talk philosophy with a 2-year-old, you don't expect to get the right understanding responses, do you?
No, I'm serious.
Yeah.
I mean,
Now, I was going to talk a bit about the reorganization through the bomb, and I might do that later on, but I'll forget that for the moment. Talk about the SR project. The SR project, something we call a syntax recognizer. Now, most of my slides from here on are verbal slides, because I found it rather difficult trying to do this in a graphical way, even though I think graphically, when I put them down on paper, I need many dimensions of paper, and it doesn't work, so I'll figure a way sometime. But anyway, what we're doing, this is, those of you who are on the net know the name of Alan Randall, and Alan is programming this stuff for me. And when you've seen the Control Builder demo on the Mac, it's supposed to be built on that base. The Control Builder is supposed to, evolved version of the Control Builder is supposed to build a base network of some structure or other, and then it's supposed to reorganize and learn so as to develop itself into a better system for understanding what it's being stressed with. Okay, the current thing, which we hope to do within the present contract, which is got 1.5 years to run, is a proof of concept. We take a very simple formal grammar which generates strings of symbols, call them letters. It has a structure, like a phrase structure or something like that. And so the strings of letters are not random, they're coordinated. You might have consonant, vowel, consonant as being a highly probable sequence. What we want to do is we anticipate that we can generate a control hierarchy that will learn this if those symbols are placed in a continuum space, right? That they're not identified as symbols at the input to the control system. Right, I'll show you a little bit of that. That's one picture I can draw. So we allow the control system to reorganize. The control system has temporal variables in it. The perceptual input functions may be shift registers, or they may have derivatives in them, or some way of getting the time sequencing effects into the system. And the idea is that it will, as often as is allowed by the probabilities in the grammar, go to where the letter is about to come in the space, the continuum space. Now, if it can do that, then we anticipate, well, we don't anticipate, if it can do that, then it will generate syntactically correct strings if the reference levels from above are fed with changing numbers. It must, because what it's able to do is to move to where it's going. Now I'll show you what I mean by a grammar, and then I'll show you, well, no, I'll show you what it means to move to first, and then I'll show you what it means by grammar. Okay. All right. There's two ways of looking at what's going on. We propose that each of the letters is given a location in a three-dimensional space. Use 3D because then we can use the visualizations of the little man. Okay? The letter has a location which is defined in 3 dimensions, which, keep in your mind the analogy that we're aiming at with speech. Think of those as speech features like frication, pitch, format 1, frequency, stuff like that. So they're located in this feature space. The target for the little man is moved by moving it to the locations of successive letters in this symbol string. The syntax recognizer has the finger. Right? The finger has to not follow the target in this case, but be there when the target is there. It's to track with the target. It won't always be able to do this. Clearly it won't. because otherwise there would be no sense in even presenting with grammar. It would know what was going to happen. Right? It has no plans. It just has a derivative in the perceptual input function, or a time behavior in the perceptual input function. Right? But that time behavior enables it to say where's the letter B and where's it going. In this diagram here, it's been at A, it was at B, and it's now going to C. Right? And so you have that in the time function, at least the last pairing. The syntax recognizer tried to get there, but it wound up short. It has a little feature space error, you see. Remember, it's never identifying, never classifying. This is very important, I think, because when you're dealing with all the speech recognition systems that I've ever heard of, they try to classify. They try to classify early, as if they can. You get phonetic feature recognized. You say, I have a frication. Or you get a phoneme recognized that says, I have an A. Or you get a word recognized that says, I have a dog. Yeah? I think that the whole system will work a lot better if you don't classify ever. Right? You just
Right.
act.
Leave the category level up there where it belongs.
When you want to do logic with it, let's have categories.
Yes.
Okay, so what I'm trying to do is to make something which, as a function of the recognition, it understands, and as a function of the understanding, it recognizes. If that makes any sense to you? Because if it works, there must be something in the control hierarchy which recognizes the transitions at the different levels of the grammar. That recognizes I've gone to a new phrase, or I've gone to a new sentence. That after this phrase, I expect that phrase with such probability, things like that. And I used the word expect in a very sloppy sense there. Yeah? Okay, here's another way of looking at exactly the same thing. Syntax generator generates a letter, C as in this, and in this pictorial example, which specifies space features in the space. The control hierarchy looks at the locations in the space and does things with its finger to track. Right?
But that doesn't show the output part of the control law.
Well, it didn't deliberately because it's just an
Right.
awful lot of things. Just
Okay,
imagine
right.
those as being the hidden circles
Right,
behind.
those, oh, okay.
And that was the intention.
So the outputs would be in the exploits, yeah, of course,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
their fingertips.
All right.
I think I didn't quite follow some of your earlier statements. This is, like right now, you present this, is looking at the letter C.
Yeah, it doesn't know anything
To
about
me, doesn't include enough variables to be referred to as a syntax.
that. Well,
It's a piece, presumably, but I don't see how you were relating to enough variables for it to be suitably termed a syntax.
I'll give you the next slide.
I don't believe you meant it was looking at the letter C, did you?
No, I mean looking at a trajectory in that
That's
space.
the position in that space.
It's looking at a trajectory in the space. That what it's looking at is at the moment a C, because that's where the point is. But it has been looking at ABC.
All right, so this is, at the moment, a terminal point in a sequence of identifications of some sort that has been recognized as having to do with some syntax or item that the generator has, that the recognizer has pulled together up to this point, and is then anticipating the letter C as the next element in this assembly.
It could be wildly wrong. But if
No,
it's got the right guesses up there, it's going to be pretty close to right by the time the letter gets there.
I'm not worrying about right and wrong, I just want to be sure I know what you're talking about.
Okay, well, this is why I'm putting this slide up here now.
You got it.
Here's a trivial grammar written up. At the top level of the grammar, you have a thing called a sentence. It could be of either of two kinds. It could have a phrase 1 followed by a sentence, or it could have phrase 2 followed by a sentence. So that's recursive. A sentence can, or in this case, must be indefinitely long. Right? A phrase 1 consists of a string 1, or a string 2, or 2 copies of a phrase 1. Right? Phrase 2 consists of a string 3 or a string 4 or 2 copies of a phrase 2, and so on. So string 3 could be the sequence CBA, or it could be a sequence ECA, or it could be 2 copies of a string 3. So any of those levels in this particular grammar could be indefinitely long, but only the sentence has to be. It never stops. There's nothing in this grammar that tells it how to stop. It goes on forever. Now, that's not sufficient to generate an output string. To generate an output string, you've got to add probabilities to these that say, when I come to the point where I've got to decide which of these to make, how do I choose which? I put probabilities on those and generate a random number and see which one to choose.
Martin, when you say generating an output string, that's generating an output string for your grammar generator machine?
The grammar generator must include a way of generating.
Yeah, okay, so this, we're looking not at the receiver at the moment.
No, this is the generator side. As I was saying, that I have no anticipation that anywhere in the recognizer will this be found.
Right.
We'll get to that, because I think it's interesting when you come to the whole question of language as artifact and the slow evolution of language. It's important that not be found within the recognizer. Here's another way of looking at part of this same thing. We won't use a grammar like that, probably. We use a hidden Markov model, which is a technical term. Hidden Markov models are much used within a speech recognition community. They work nicely for handling speech at the current level of speech recognition technology. They're among the best that we get. But what it means, a hidden Markov model, a Markov model says if I'm in state A, I have a certain probability of going to my own state again, or going to state B, or of going to state C, and you draw a whole lot of little circles. Probably do it analytically, but you can draw circles with arrows joining them, and all probabilities are stuck on them, and it gives you the same sort of results as this. Okay. Right, one more feature of the control space. In most speech recognition systems, all that I know of, the one problem that they try to get around is a problem called co-articulation. Co-articulation is the fact that in the acoustic signal for a vowel, there's a lot of information about which consonant preceded it, and towards the end of the vowel about which consonant it follows it. In the consonant, there's a fair amount of information about what vowels are surrounding it. And so that the information about each letter is spread over a good deal of time. And usually, unless people are speaking extremely clearly and deliberately for the purpose of being recognized, then you find that the context of what you're saying has an incredibly large effect on just precisely the sounds that you're getting. One of the things I observe, again, it's not a fact, it's an observation, is that if you go to talks given by people who are builders of speech recognition systems, they all talk very clearly. Well, they may or may not, but they say it very clearly. Anyway, I think that in this control system approach to it, co-articulation is a great benefit. And here's why. Here's a visualization of the string A, B, C, D. You see the point?
Yes.
Right.
Take a shortcut.
Well, it's not so much that it takes a shortcut, but the fact that it's making a bend in the trajectory says which direction it's likely to go after the B, where it's going. It's coming around. There's another thing about speech analysis. For most of the phonemes of speech, one tends to specify target locations for the articulators, but they don't usually get there. They turn around and they're going to the next place before they get there. Right? The control system is looking all along the trajectory. It gets much more information. If you have a sharp corner at B, it has no way of knowing where it's going to go next, other than by understanding the grammar itself. Right? If you're following it with co-articulation, it should be much easier for the control system to chase ahead before the actual letter gets to C and be there at the right time when it arrives.
Well, what you're showing up here is like trying to model the speaker, because you're saying the speaker's reference signal went A, B, C, D.
It's not.
The speaker's output followed the red curved trajectory. It never actually got to A, B, C, or D, but if you knew the properties of the control system, you could infer where the reference signal was.
That's right. And what the learning, the reorganizing of the control system should do is enable it to track that trajectory,
Yes.
right? And track that trajectory in the time that the speaker is doing it. Now-
Will your output generator actually speak and co-articulate, or what, I'm still having
Well,
trouble.
remember, we're dealing with a trivial syntax here. Half a dozen letters as its possible output strings. You can extrapolate to what I want to extrapolate to, which is precisely what you're talking about. Right? The necessary consequence of being able to recognize using this control scheme is that it will execute and output generate the same, well, not the same. It will be able to output the structure that it has been learned to receive, but it won't necessarily do it in the same way. But no one on the outside would tell that.
When it's got its own articulators, it will be able to use them to create a
Yeah.
path like
All
that.
its articulator in this first thing is the finger of the little man. Right?
Martin, this is more than a description, is it not? It's a generative theoretical model that actually creates something.
Well, we hope it will be. If it fails to create it, it won't be.
It's a putative generative model.
Yes. As I told you before, this is highly speculative. But the reason I'm bringing it in here now, rather than coming to you at a time when we have the results, is that I want to use this speculation and say, what if it works? And use it as an example. Because surely people are able to perform what this supposed system is trying to do. And this system is simpler than people, and I can use it as an example for what might happen with people.
Since you referred to our brief conversation, let me say, I enjoy speculative materials. I used to read science fiction.
I still do lots of it.
We even
I still
wrote
do
some
lots of
together,
it.
Bob.
You did, didn't you?
We even wrote some together.
Yeah.
Did you?
On this, excuse me, what this calls to my mind is that this appears to be a form of projection. And the straight lines are projecting by means of a linear extrapolation. But if you use a polynomial extrapolation, you can get any old kind of curve you want. And I think this, and from that representational standpoint, is what you're talking about.
It may well be. In fact, they use exactly that in a lot of speech recognition systems. They start off by taking the acoustic signal and predicting it using a polynomial approximation, which is typically 10 or 14 degrees.
And here again, though, you have to establish the coefficients of the terms in the polynomial,
Oh, yes.
and so on again.
Right.
You're also making assumptions about the degree of the polynomial. I've seen some work with respect to propeller performance that gets about 11 terms in the
Well, I'm saying in
polynomial.
the speech recognition business,
Yeah.
for
But
low bandwidth coding, 10 is standard, and,
The-
and for recognition, 14 may be more common.
I think part of the point, though, is that I'm not sure this is a suitable way to attack the problem, because of the polynomial concept. You can handle any number of variables.
That's right, and that is a problem. I never liked the
Yeah.
linear predictive
I
coding
think-
method anyway.
And as Bill
But you can
did
do it.
way back with your RAT paper, you proposed an alternative means of thinking about the problem rather than simply throwing the mathematics at it.
Yeah, we're not planning any polynomials. If the thing finds polynomials, fine. No problem with that. Don't object to polynomials. It's just if they're good, they're good. Anyway, now I want to go to the next stage of the thing. Let's just assume all that works, all right? You've got to recognize that will recognize and will generate the strings that the formal syntax will. Its perceptual input functions allow that, its output connections allow that. It tracks, right? If you generate the reference numbers now not being zeros, you leave the perceptual inputs, the sensory inputs at 0 and put new references in at the top, it should generate strings, which for the most part will be strings that the formal syntax would have generated. But it's by no means guaranteed that they all will be, right? Because it depends on the error signals that have been observed in the learning process, and only those strings which will be in the formal grammar would have generated error signals. And if your reference signals that you put in have combinations that just don't occur, you'll have to say something new. Right? It wasn't in the syntax. But it will be something that's kind of like what was in the syntax. At low levels, it probably will be what was in the syntax. At high levels, it will be something new. So, you can say that it will generate quasi-grammatical strings. Right? It's not continuous. I mean, it's continuous, but it's not exact. It's not formal.
This is the first time I've really understood what you're talking about.
Yeah,
The
me too.
syntax
This has
generator.
got to work.
Okay, now let's imagine making another one of these things, right? But instead of, imagine making another one of them in the same way we made the first one, okay? It too will recognize the formal syntax. It will generate the formal syntax. When you fire higher level references with different values, it'll produce strings which are quasi-grammatical, but they won't be the same as the first ones, all right? They'll be sort of right. They might not recognize each other. So, let them talk to each other. All right? And what should happen? When one produces something which is in the formal syntax, it's no problem, they're matched. They agree. When it produces something that isn't, there's some reorganization that goes on in the other. Each of them can induce reorganization in each other, and so that eventually, if they talk together for infinite time, they should develop, even though it's differently constructed in each, the ability to talk the same language, right? The same syntax. Let's make another one. But it doesn't see the formal grammar ever. It only sees what the first two do, and they don't listen to it to begin with. Right? It should learn what they have converged to. That's a kind of stable convergence. Right?
Bruce Nevin is going to just adore this when he understands it.
Well, I hope so. Can't project it, but I hope we will. So eventually you've got a whole lot of them. And when they get kind of mature, you don't wait till infinite time. You let each of the society listen to what the other one is saying. I mean, extrapolate this to a human society. People don't really change their language because of baby babble. But when you're talking to teenagers, you understand and change what you're saying. And you get a new language. Your language evolves throughout your life. Right? Different. So anyway.
All I have to say to that is far out.
I should think your teenagers were somewhat older now.
They don't say that anymore.
I do.
Anyway, so the result of generations and killing off the ones that learn from the formal grammar and the ones that learn from them and the ones that learn from them and the ones that learn from them until there's no memory left of the original formal grammar. They probably never, well, not never, many of them probably fail to learn exactly the formal grammar and wouldn't recognize it even, because the learning never goes to completion. It never is perfect. And they make little changes. Their language, what they speak, and I'm deliberately moving the extrapolation into natural language from the simple syntax. The language that they speak is deviant, but it's not deviant from the group as it then exists. Right? The group has a language which they all more or less understand pretty well the same, and each of them has some idiosyncrasies about it. So imagine that some of them are separated from each other into groups. These deviations will diverge. You'll get dialects, you'll get shifts of language, you'll get like in the European great sound shifts where P's turn to F's in some languages and things like that. This happens at every level of the grammar. Right? It happens at phonotactic level, it happens at philosophic level. Right? Every level.
But it doesn't seem to happen at the syntactic level as much as
Doesn't
it
it?
does.
Do we speak German syntax? Do we speak Latin syntax?
Well, since I only know one, I at best know. It just seems like the arbitrariness of the relationship between the sound and the thing across languages is, I hate to be a Chomsky about it, but it seems, but I do think there's some degree of, maybe I'm wrong.
We're
It seems
not-
like the grammars, they get pretty different, I know, but,
But remember that nowhere yet, and I probably won't, deliberately talk about the meaning of a word in the sense of it having anything to do with the rest of the control hierarchy. It is obvious to me that this links in, that control hierarchy is no different in kind from the rest of the
well, I
control
agree, and I
hierarchy.
agree with what you're
And
doing.
there can be links anywhere, at any level, into the rest of the control hierarchy for references or for percepts.
I buy that. I like the whole thing, and I like what you're doing. I just wonder if the comparison to grammar, that grammar wouldn't be more constrained. Like you can only go so arbitrarily far. I'm just thinking because of this idea that there's certain
Listen to what you're saying
perceptual
yourself.
constraints.
Listen to what you're saying yourself, and ask what an English teacher would say. Like, I mean, this is, it's because we.
Oh, I know that I'd be very weird about the
No,
grammar.
you're
I just
not. You're
think there's-
talking perfectly normal, interactive grammar.
Well, that's true.
And it isn't following the rules, but we all.
Oh, okay,
understand
I
it.
see. Just in terms of the way you. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I guess speaking grammar is.
And even written grammar. I mean, the point is that if you take what they teach you in school is good grammar, you've got what I called earlier the core, the formal grammar internals that everybody can refer back to and can agree on, more or less. Not everybody understands it in exactly the same way, but it's kind of a structure that is mutually agreed and on which everybody has their own deviances. Right?
I just like this idea that it seems to me like perception, you've got things, so you've got objects or subjects, and then you've got things that they do. So there's, all languages seem to have that,
Yeah.
operator, operand kind of property.
Well, this is a constraint that is the
It's clearly going to be related to the fact that in the world you do things on things you
Right,
receive.
that's what I mean.
Right?
Yeah.
So it makes an awful lot of sense that the reference signals that go to a language generator are related to that kind of structure, doing things to things you perceive. And that's what you want to have, I said, called it primal message. You want to perceive that the other is perceiving the same relation.
Yeah.
Now, the critical thing in this is what are going to be the criteria for this organization? And that's where the constraint put in by the external world can come in partly. But you don't have to have that in there. You have to perceive something about the language that's going on, other than the language that's going on. It has to be some side effect.
Well, actually, if thinking strictly within the communicative paradigm, going back to that layered diagram, what you have to perceive is something that says to you that the other understood at that level.
Okay.
That is in the outer world, but it's not the world outside of communication. That may be the result of the other perceiving. It may be the indication you want the other perceives. Say, can I have the salt? The indication you have is the salt moves to you.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yes.
And that's fine, but that's not necessarily. It could be all in facial gestures, hand gestures, or speech saying, yeah, I understand that.
Or mothers repeat strings and correct them up a little bit when they're not quite right. There's all kinds of feedback.
Yeah. And that's helping the reorganization. But it is...
See, reorganization can't have anything to do with particular sentences. It has to do with concepts like correctness.
Well, not concepts, but it has to do with the fact that you get what you want in your perceptual signals, that you don't have sustained error.
Right, but it can't have to do with the particular thing you want, only with the fact that you got what you want. So it's going to look at error signals
Right, that's
without
right.
knowing what they mean.
That's exactly the point. That's exactly the point.
Yeah.
And I started off, when I was at your house, and I said that I thought I might like to talk about this. My notion was that I would talk about stable convergences in dynamic systems, because that's what this is. And then I thought, yesterday, was it yesterday? It seems such a long time ago. The day before yesterday, Rick and I walked down at lunchtime to the village, and I was telling a little bit about the SR project, and I thought, hey, I can use this as a lead into this stability thing.
Well, now I understand it. I didn't understand that. Actually, you might find that there's actually less variation that happens than I'm thinking would. It might be that there are some
If you want to fine it
when
down,
they start
there's
interacting?
a core language which is English, right? Within that, there are regional variations, dialects. There's no clear boundary between dialects most of the time, but you can say that there's a North Carolina dialect, perhaps there's an Ontario dialect, there's whatever, right? There are dialects of English. And then you come, there's family idiosyncratic things. Some family might have a word buzzaboom that nobody else has, and it means something or other particular to that family. And then every individual has their own idiosyncratic ways of putting things. Yeah? It's a convergence of divergence, if you like.
Maybe this is in a little different direction from what concerns you right now. I'm not quite sure the boundaries of what's called syntax, but you referred to other languages. And one of the most useful experiences I had was acquiring 4 years of Latin. And among the big differences between English and Latin is the sentence structure. I'm talking classical Latin. You go to medieval Latin, and your sentence structure is more like English. Go to German, I'm not talking modern German because I was not exposed to that. But standard literary and technical type German, their sentence structure is much more like classical Latin. It's a long, complicated, interacting sentences. But with English, it's the sequence of words is the primary control, whereas in these languages, a major control is the detailed form, spelling, and pronunciation of the words, where it shifts depending on the significance.
The particles.
Now, maybe this is not part of your present concern.
The specifics of this were not. I really only got into trying to give this talk because I thought that this language issue had been batted back and forth around the net, and this was a good opportunity to say something a little more extended than one can write and have people read.
I guess that was before I was on the net.
Well, this makes a lot of sense. This is very interesting to me, and it doesn't conflict with anything I was objecting to about the recognition aspect of Nevensburg. This is about reorganization and what happens when...
But the point that I'm trying to make is this last sentence, that the language is and can be considered an artifact just as much as a rock can.
This is the point that I was having trouble with on the net of the discussions, was that it appeared there as though the production itself were the ultimate point, that the system was producing language. And I was trying to argue that, in fact, it might be incidental or a side effect, in the sense I think you might mean by artifact here.
Well, the artifactual nature of it is its stability. Like I completely forgot. I was going to introduce this discussion with an example.
There are two senses of it.
Yeah, right, exactly. It is in both the dynamic sense and in the control sense. But I completely forgot. I meant to introduce this whole language as artifact talk with an example that I heard on the radio on the trip down here. Apparently, in Europe, there are two different sort of gestures of the head for yes and no. Our normal one we know about, and a Greek one, which is different, which apparently, I can't remember which is which. You depress your head and that means yes. No, I don't know which it is, and there's some kind of head toss that means no. It's that, okay. All right. But anyway, there are two different ways of doing it, both contrasting head gestures between yes and no, but two completely different styles. Now, in Italy, according to the guy on the radio, if you go down between Rome and Naples, you pass pockets of the Greek style surrounded by European style, and there are regions where the Greek style is used, which are quite well defined, apparently. And it turns out that these regions are pretty closely exactly the regions that were Greek trading centers 1000 BC. And that language of yes, no in the head has apparently been stable as a community artifact for 3,000 years.
The reason I say Bruce Nevin will like this a lot is that it shows this is a truly social creation. And it's not exactly a social control system, but it's certainly a social product.
My point is that all the social conventions have to be stable points or stable orbits of an interacting dynamic system.
Yeah, this is the kind of analysis appropriate to society, where it's the outcome of a lot of control systems doing something, but as you say, the result is not a control system, but some stable dynamic configuration.
Yeah, and it's that dynamic which is it's the stable artifact.
Right.
Anyway, that's all I had to say, and Wayne wants to talk something.
That's excellent.
That's great, yeah, that's really good.